Hey guys, welcome to Screenwriting in Paradise, the podcast. That's why I'm wearing sunglasses, because it don't matter. You're just hearing this. But the bottom line is this is a visual storytelling podcast, meaning I'm actually going to still do some wowza moments from film. It's not science, it's not film analysis like someone wrote in, which is nice of them, but that makes it too scientific. This is more about finding the fun in storytelling in movies, why they work. In this podcast, I'll just try to visualize it. So there will be no movie clips, no pictures, nothing, okay? But the bottom line is I will try my best to, again, tell the story. And that's what we do naturally anyway. When we talk, we tell stories, and they create visuals in our brain, right? It's like when you read a book, a well-told book, you're always visualizing it while you're reading it. But that's exactly what we do when we tell each other stories. And so I figured, why not try to do this thing that I'm doing right now as a podcast, just because a few people have asked me to, both when I'm ranting and rambling, which I tend to do when I'm trying to point stuff out in my teaching or workshops, but also because my friend Paul, this is actually a shout out to Paul, because he's a carpenter, master carpenter, and he listens to lots of podcasts, and he said he'd love to hear me try to do this as a podcast. So what I think I'll do is just, basically give you this similar introduction that I gave on the visual video for this podcast. So in case you haven't seen the film, it won't matter. But there's this incredible, basically 15-minute segment in the middle of this film, about an hour into One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So without further ado, I will start. Screenwriting in Paradise podcast number 1. Oh, quick disclaimer. If you hear any sounds in the background, it's actually a beautiful sunny day here in Denmark, where I live. I'm American, from the Boston area. I was in LA for a long time, so I'm spoiled by the sun. But here we don't get it that much. So when we do, I go outside because it is Screenwriting in Paradise. In fact, I am wearing a tropical shirt, just, to fit the part, and my Ray-Bans. So anyway, let's get to it. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, in case you haven't seen it, is set in a mental hospital in the 1970s, when they had really creepy mental hospitals. I've actually been in a few abandoned ones, and they are scary. But they're basically like 3 stories high. They're huge, hundreds of rooms, long hallways, and full of, challenged people back then, which we didn't take very good care of. They're all very notorious for, sadly probably just the abuse that they put on their patients. I won't say my last name, but my family was associated with one outside of Boston, where apparently that sort of thing happened, 100 years ago or so. But it was distant relatives. It is my last name. Anyway, the Oregon State Hospital is where this movie is actually shot in reality, so it's actually really shot there. The disclaimer is that if you hear any noises in the background, I'm shooting outside. Oh, because of the Paradise thing. So I am shooting outside, but you might hear tractors, airplanes, cars, trains, automobiles, that kind of things, dogs, ducks. I have 2 ducks. So if you hear any quacking or a tractor driving by, that's just part of the ball game if I decide to release this. And wind. That's always the biggest battle, wind. I'm literally talking into my MacBook Pro right now. So I digress. Let's go back. The story takes place in a mental hospital. The 2 lead actors are Jack Nicholson, in probably his best role ever. He won the Oscar for it. And Louise Fletcher, his rival, the antagonist, Nurse Ratched, who in my book is like the greatest villain of all time, because she rules this mental hospital with a iron fist. She really can do whatever she wants to any of the people, the poor patients in this hospital. And she's just so good. And she also won the Oscar. In fact, I think the film swept all the Oscars. Very rare. I think 3 films in history have done it. It Happened One Night, the great Frank Capra film from 1935 or something, with Claudette Colbert, which you absolutely should see. It's hilarious. And Clark Gable, of course. And then I think Silence of the Lambs, of all films, won, which is a solid film with Jodie Foster, obviously, and Hannibal Lecter, an equally evil villain, but I think Nurse Ratched definitely blows him away. But not as strong a film. But I always remember when that film swept the Oscars, it was a weak year, they said. as far as entries. So, I digress again. Back to the story, which is basically Jack Nicholson plays this guy named McMurphy, who is not insane, yet he is in this insane asylum, mental hospital, as they used to call them. Gosh, I don't even know what they call them now, something for challenged people or something, where it's a little more politically correct. But we'll call it a mental hospital. And he is there because he's actually a criminal who was able to fool the warden of the prison he was going to go into. He was able to fool this warden into thinking he's nuts, he's crazy. So they transferred him to this mental hospital where he thought he'd have a cushy stay until he got out. What he didn't realize is he had to go up against Nurse Ratched, which is way worse than the warden he would have had to deal with in the prison. So halfway through this story, which is where I'm going to start talking about it, he's been there a while, and he's befriended the patients, and Nurse Ratched is definitely suspicious of him and does not like him. He's powerful, and she's definitely very powerful and doesn't let anybody mess with her. So what she does is she has these like daily meetings with the patients where they all literally sit in a circle, kind of like in a Alcoholics Anonymous thing, where they all walk around. She goes around the circle, and each person presents their case or their problems or what happened yesterday. And in this case, it's usually about medicine or tub room privileges or something like that. And in this particular scene, because I think they've had more than one of these, where they sit and she leads a discussion in this circle of people, like 10 patients, and again the visual is in the background is this huge kind of like recreation room, I guess, sparsely furnished recreation room, but it's big and it's old and it's very white and pale. And in the background are a few of the chronics, I think she calls them, for kind of mean word, but the chronically ill, the ones who can't really speak or function. They just kind of walk around like in circles behind these ones who are sort of functioning, who talk, and while this is happening, while this little talk is happening, she's addressing McMurphy and says, "So tell us, Mr. McMurphy, what's your problem today," or whatever. Basically, he says, "Well, I just found out that all these other guys," and he points at all the guys who he's been hanging out with, because again, this is halfway through the movie, including some great actors like Danny DeVito, who you've probably heard of, or Christopher Lloyd from the Back to the Future movies. But he nods to them and says, "I just learned that they are all here voluntarily," which is completely nuts, because it's a really mean, harsh place. But they're nuts, so it makes sense. But he is upset because he's not there voluntarily. He's definitely under lock and key, and he's mad at them because they haven't informed him, especially because he's been needling her, Nurse Ratched, and they should have warned him, said, "Be nice to Nurse Ratched or she will, punish you in various ways," which is about to happen, actually. But he's upset that they hadn't told him that, so he could, probably, get out earlier or, behave better. And when when she challenges him on that, he actually turns to these guys who he has been hanging out with for an hour now in the movie, a couple of days or whatever, in fictional time, and says, "Come on, you guys, you're not, I can't believe it." He goes through each one of them. He asks them, "Are you here voluntarily, Cheswick?" And they're all like nodding, yes, yes, yes. And he's like, he couldn't believe it. He's like, "No, you guys should be out chasing girls, having fun. You're not lunatics. You're not crazy. You're just like everyone else out there." And he has been, having fun with them, playing basketball and things like that. So he just can't believe they're in there voluntarily, and that they don't have the guts to walk out or tell him about Nurse Ratched. But when he gives this little speech, this little rebel-rousing speech, it actually gets some of these other guys in the group, riled up a bit. So one raises his hand nervously and says, "So why is it, Nurse Ratched, that you actually lock, our dormitories during the day and on the weekends, because they want to be in their rooms?" And she's like, gets a little frustrated. And she's like, well, it's because you have to be together and you have to be able to talk together, and otherwise you just go back to your room and be alone. And which actually makes sense. But the guy's like, oh. But then the other guy, Cheswick, and this is where really I get into it in the other video, he stands up and says, Nurse Ratched, why or when do we get our cigarettes back? And Nurse Ratched's like, oh, well, you're not going to get your cigarettes back, Mr. Cheswick. And she always calls him all Mr. Cheswick, Mr. Harding, Mr. McMurphy. Except actually with McMurphy, she does like to treat them like kids too. It's like it's a way of like being impersonal, but also when she gets personal, she treats them like a kid. So when she talks to McMurphy, she calls him Randall, because his name is actually Randall McMurphy, but he goes by Mac or maybe Randy. But Randall's like such a little kid's name, so it's funny. She's like, Randall? But anyway, Cheswick wants his cigarettes, and she says, well, Mr. Cheswick, you will not get your cigarettes back because Mr. McMurphy has been holding a gambling parlor, like a casino, in the tub room, and everybody in there lost all their cigarettes and their money. And so from now on, you're not going to have your cigarettes, and you're going to lose your tub room privileges. So there literally is apparently this tub room, which I imagine in the 70s were those, big porcelain tubs with legs on them, and, where they'd all be in there soaping up, I guess, and, gambling, I guess, and losing their cigarettes and their money to Jack or to Mac. And, McMurphy thinks it's kind of funny, and actually Christopher Lloyd thinks it's really funny. He's a good crazy guy in this little group. And meanwhile, one of the others, who I guess was not in the tub room because he still has his cigarettes, his name's Harding, he holds up a cigarette for the orderly to come over and light, because apparently they're not allowed to have lighters or matches because, they could burn the house down because they're crazy. So this orderly comes over, orderly, like staff member, and lights Mr. Harding's cigarette, which it's a great visual. He's like holding it up, with the cigarette pointing straight up, like it's almost like he's raising his hand with a cigarette. So they light his cigarette, and he starts smoking it. And Mac, Jack Nicholson's character, looks over, and McMurphy says, hey, Harding, you got a cigarette. Give a cigarette to Cheswick. And Harding's like, no, I'm not going to give a cigarette to Cheswick. It's my last one. And they start arguing about it. And Cheswick, meanwhile, is like, I don't want your cigarette. I want my cigarettes, Nurse Ratched. Where are my cigarettes? Like a little kid, I want my ball back. And while they're arguing back and forth, the Danny DeVito character, who's this funny little sly wry guy, is sitting next to this Mr. Harding who's smoking a cigarette. But Harding is arguing with Max, so he's not looking at the Danny DeVito character. I think it's called Martini. So Martini literally is looking at his hand, Harding's hand, because he's holding a cigarette between his fingers and, looking at Mac. And Martini just grabs the cigarette from his fingers and takes a quick hit off a cigarette and then throws it across the room to one of the other patients. And so, like little kids, they start playing keep away from this guy, Harding, who's running around, give me my cigarette. And meanwhile, Cheswick's, getting riled up because, again, this all goes back to McMurphy riling them up by saying, hey, why are you guys in here? You should be out of here because you're volunteers. So the cigarette starts getting thrown around the room, back and forth, while Harding's chasing it. And Cheswick's getting more and more riled up, saying he wants his cigarettes, when finally the cigarette gets lost. But we, the audience, and this is the beauty of it, it's called dramatic irony, the omniscient view. We get to see where the cigarette lands. And where it lands is in Christopher Lloyd, the patient, I forget his name in the movie, but it's the actor from Back to the Future, where it lands in like the cuff of his pajama bottoms, like near his ankle, and it's still burning, of course. So we see it down there burning next to his ankle, and it's just sitting there, and Harding can't find it, and then Nurse Ratched suddenly, who lets these things go on, I guess just to humor herself, and let them converse, basically says, Harding, sit down. And he gets up and he says, oh, sorry. And he goes back and sits down, and she continues the chat until Cheswick again interrupts and says, Nurse Ratched, I want my cigarettes. And she's like, sit down, Cheswick. And just as that happens, finally, after like 60 seconds, because again, this is called a ticking clock, right? The cigarette lands on this guy's, ankle, but it hasn't burnt him yet because it's in his pajamas. But it burns through the pajamas after 60 seconds into his ankle, and he freaks out. And, again, he's crazy, so he really freaks out. He hops around like a maniac, holding his ankle and jumping on one foot and bouncing off the walls and screaming. The orderlies come running. And Cheswick, meanwhile, because the chaos has suddenly exploded from, being sort of quiet to chaos and everyone's screaming, he starts yelling, "Nurse Ratched, I want my cigarettes!" And McMurphy just can't take it anymore. He's freaking out. So he just stands up and he charges over past Nurse Ratched to her little office where it's basically this glass window where she actually, feeds the patient's medicine from. It's like a sliding glass window. And he just takes his fist and smashes the glass and sticks his arm in there, and there's a whole carton of Red Dogs, Marlboro, cigarettes. And he grabs the whole carton and yanks it out and storms back to Cheswick, who's still screaming that he wants the cigarettes, and he goes, "Here you go, Cheswick," and he thrusts it into his chest, and Cheswick grabs it like a teddy bear and hugs his carton of cigarettes. And of course the orderlies now dive on McMurphy because he smashed this window, and all sacrificing himself for Cheswick. But still, he did a bad thing. So they jump on him and they literally are about to break his arm. His arm's like bleeding, literally bleeding, because they have it behind his back, and there's like 2 or 3 of them holding him down. And then in the background we see the chief, it's the big Indian from the actual original book by Ken Kesey, who's the narrator of the book. They call him the big Indian in the book, but I think they call him the chief in the movie. So the chief, and he's a real Native American, amazing actor named Will Sampson, I think. Amazing. He's so great in this movie. But he's towering. He's like 7 feet tall or 6'8", or a huge guy. And so he walks over, and the thing about him is he's deaf and dumb. Again, politically correct. I don't know what it's called now, but he can't hear and he can't speak. And so he walks over and picks up like the 3 orderlies with one arm and McMurphy, and frees McMurphy basically, which is awesome. As he's doing this, like the troops or the reinforcements come in, which is like 8 other orderlies. She's blowing a whistle or something. They come charging down the hallway and pile on. So it's like a whole rugby scrum or whatever, with them all rolling around on the floor. And then he's followed by this guy in black who I call Dr. Death, because he's the one who performs all sorts of weird experiments on them when they need attention. They have to be subdued medically, rather. So that was the end of the sequence, and it was just the choreography of the cigarette and this ticking clock, the cigarette, and actually there's 2 other ticking clocks too, which is actually this guy Cheswick who wants a cigarette because he slowly explodes, and then Jack, who also slowly explodes. So all 3 of them actually explode. The cigarette causes the other patient to explode, the Christopher Lloyd patient, but there's actually 3 ticking clocks, and they all are paid off basically at the same time. And then it ends with this wonderful chief saving Jack, or trying to save Mac rather. And then it immediately cuts to a orderly, because of course it's a few minutes later. That's what you do in the movies. You can jump ahead, with an orderly opening like not a prison door, but a locked door with metal wiring all over it, and bringing in 3 of the patients: McMurphy, the chief, the towering Indian or Native American, and Cheswick, the guy who lost his cigarettes, who was screaming because they were all naughty, right? So Nurse Ratched has obviously decided that they must be punished. But we don't know what's going to happen. We just see that they're brought in there, and I think they might have handcuffs on or something, because if I recall. But I'm not watching the movie right now. But anyway, they're brought in like prisoners, and they're put in this hallway where there's a bench, basically. And this hallway is full of patients. And these are like the chronics. These are the bad ones. They're like walking around in circles. One guy has like a broom or a mop. He's like just walking around in circles. There's people sitting on the floor or lying on the floor. They're in wheelchairs. Literally they're all kind of like zombies, and they're all in white. Everyone wears white here. I mean, the chronic patients especially, they all wear these sort of like white, for lack of a better word, smock or pajamas. And suddenly that same door where they came in, and these 3 guys are sitting on the bench waiting for God knows what, but that door opens again, and in comes Dr. Death, the guy in the black, right? In the black suit. which just stands out a lot because all these other guys are in white. And then Milos Forman, the director, is so brilliant. He actually, the choreography here is amazing because what happens is Dr. Death walks in, all these chronic patients see him and they, like it's almost magical. They just kind of dance, or not dance, but like, sway or move out of the vision of Dr. Death. So we see what he sees, which is this, they all just kind of disappear into doorways and crooks and nannies and stuff. So they're all gone, So it's clear, just a subliminal message. Uh-oh, who is this guy? And McMurphy's watching all this, like, what? Where'd they all go? So even though they're all, maybe 5% with it, if that 5% is enough to know that they should get out of Dodge when Dr. Death comes, because Dr. Death is no good, and you don't want to be susceptible to whatever he's going to do. You don't want to be the one that Dr. Death chooses, basically. And obviously, it's not them. It's going to be these three guys. So Dr. Death comes marching down the hallway, just doesn't even acknowledge McMurphy and the chief and Cheswick, and goes into this room. And out comes a nurse and says, "Gentlemen, here's your medicine." And then she says, "Mr. Cheswick, it's time to come in." And he starts screaming. Cheswick's like, "No!" And like 3 orderlies come and grab him. And he's like screaming bloody murder. And yeah, I'm pretty sure he's handcuffed, but they literally have to drag him, 3 or 4 guys, or a couple guys anyway, drag him into this room screaming bloody murder. And when he does this, it's actually kind of humorous. All these chronic patients come out and, out of the nooks and crannies and the doors and look. And, because Dr. Death is no longer in the room. And they also know they're not the ones getting chosen. So for them, it's probably the most entertainment they get in weeks. And it's another masterful stroke of this director, Milos Forman, what he does during this little sequence. He shows these quick, like, subliminal flashes of some of these chronics, the really bad ones, who are like behind cages or behind bars, because they're not even allowed out of their rooms. They're that bad, they're that dangerous. But it's like, I think there's like 6 or 7 of these, like, just quick close-ups of these guys watching from behind bars, which is, again, it adds to the reality and the creepiness of it. And so after Cheswick is dragged in kicking and screaming, a new ticking clock, by the way, we go back to the chief and McMurphy sitting on the bench alone. And of course, we know that, Cheswick is now in that room with Dr. Death. We're already forgotten, that's the whole beauty of, planting and payoff, because it's like if you see a gun and then you see it later in the movie, oh yeah, right? But you forget about it because other stuff's happening. And, it's called exposition. Information we need to know happens, or action. But anyway, the bottom line is these 2 guys start talking, and or these guys, one of them is mute, the chief. He can't talk. He's deaf and dumb. But Jack is just, sitting there looking, can't believe, what just happened to Cheswick. He's not sure what just happened to Cheswick, but he takes a pack of juicy fruit, of gum, out of his pocket, and he looks at the chief and he offers him one. The chief looks at the gum and he takes, one piece out. I think there's 5 or 6 sticks in one of those packs, and he says, "Thank you." And Jack does like a triple take. What? And Jack Nicholson's a fabulous actor, arguably one of the best ever. So Jack just has this unbelievable, kind of like semi-stunned look. He's looking at the chief, not believing what he just heard. And to confirm it, Milos Forman very brilliantly, or the screenwriter, has the chief say, "Ah, juicy fruit," which is one of my favorite lines of all time. "Ah, juicy fruit." And I think it's arguably the biggest reveal of all time, because halfway through the movie, we realize that not only does, the chief, he's not deaf and dumb, he's fooling him too, but now, Max got an ally, and it's awesome. It's like, and that's exactly what Max says. That's where, again, Jack Nicholson's acting is unbelievable, because he goes from being like not believing what he heard to this just like explosion in his face. His facial, expression goes like, "Oh my God!" He can do the OMG thing better than anybody. It's almost like a facelift thing. He's like, "Wow!" "You fooled him, Chief. You fooled him." You know, he's saying it quietly, of course, so no one hears it, but he's just like so excited that he has an ally and that the Chief was able to pull this off as, you know, so brilliantly for so long, being deaf and dumb. And just as quickly, so after about 5 seconds of him being all excited, then you see the facial expression change again. Brilliant acting. It just like wipes another way where you can see he's thinking. He goes, "What are we gonna do here, Chief? What are we gonna do? How are we gonna get out of this place?" You know, because he's got an ally. You know, so he's thinking, and the Chief just looks over at him. He goes, "Canada." You know, this is 1975, when, of course, all the draft dodgers and everybody else would go to Canada. It was a beacon of freedom. And so I guess if you escape a mental hospital, you go to Canada. And so that's what happened, you know. Well, that's what will happen. I won't give you spoil alert there. But the bottom line is that the Chief has like 3 words in this part of the movie anyway. His first 3 words in the movie are, you know, "thank you," I guess, and then "juicy fruit" and "Canada." And so right after he says Canada, the Cheswick is brought out on a stretcher, and he's comatose. So it was not good. That's the end of that ticking clock. But then, of course, the next person to go in is McMurphy. So McMurphy is dragged in, or not dragged in, he goes in willingly with these orderlies because he doesn't know what's going to happen. He's definitely confused seeing, you know, Cheswick go by on a stretcher. And when he gets in there, there's Dr. Death, and they, you know, and 6 people, nurses and orderlies, and they put him down on this gurney or bed or whatever, and literally lays down backwards, making fun of things like, you know, something about Nurse Ratched, and he's just making jokes and nervously. And when he lies down, they literally put on these kind of like white puffy headphone things are on his temples, and it's basically they're going to give him Electro Shock Therapy. And he still doesn't know what it is. They put a big rubber thing into his mouth, kind of like what's called in Danish, it's called a nook, like a sucker for babies, you know, a rubber thing, and basically so he won't bite his tongue. And they stick it in his mouth, and he bites onto it, and still doesn't know what's going to happen. And then they zap him, and he like, his face all scrunches up, and it's nasty. It's just really hard to watch, and you can understand why this movie actually changed the way, you know, especially Western culture thought about these mental institutions. I mean, literally, this movie is, you know, it's changed the way we deal with these poor people. I mean, a lot of these places are gone, thankfully. It never should have been happening this way. But it was the norm back then, so this movie's great for exposing that as well, in the book, of course, before that. But so, you know, McMurphy's brain dead, we think. We have no idea. And then right after that, you know, we cut again, it's movies, so you cut ahead, and you don't see the Chief getting his electroshock therapy. He's still sitting out on the bench, but you go immediately to Nurse Ratched holding one of these little, again, Alcoholics Anonymous, or, you know, Mental Patients Anonymous meetings. They're all in a circle, when in the distance down the hallway you see McMurphy coming in through that same locked door we saw earlier, and he's, you know, way in the distance. And then as he approaches, he's kind of walking like a zombie. He looks like he's brain dead, literally. In fact, I was just at a Stanley Kubrick function this weekend, and the actor who played Private Pyle in Full Metal Jacket, if you ever saw that, Kubrick's brilliant film about Vietnam, he's the guy who in the beginning kills the drill sergeant. It's an amazing sequence. If you haven't seen it, watch it. Again, it's not a spoiler. It's the beginning of the movie, but the guy's name's Vincent D'Onofrio, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. Great actor. But he says in that movie, it's in reference to Jack in The Shining, but it's also the same here in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He says, yeah, so Stanley directed me to, and he called it the Kubrick look or something. But Stanley directed me to like drop my chin, like, you know, to my chest basically, and then look up. So you kind of, your mouth is open, and, you know, your chin is down, your mouth is open, you're looking up like a crazy, like you're going to kill someone. It's the Kubrick killer look, I think he called it. Because, you know, that's what he does in Full Metal Jacket when he goes crazy before he kills the drill sergeant. And that's exactly what, you know, happens with Jack in The Shining, and absolutely happens right here in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But when Jack's doing this Kubrick look, walking down the hallways, you know, basically, you know, like Frankenstein, like kung, 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 can barely walk. all the patients are freaking out. And you look at him like, oh my God, his brain has been cut out of his head or something. And again, me as a first-time watcher, I'm thinking, Christ, is that what electroshock therapy does to somebody? Like totally fries their brain? And no, it's Jack or Mac is playing with these guys. Of course, I guess it can't be good for your brain, but he's not brain dead. But we don't know this until he winks at the chief. He walks by, like he can't talk, and then he looks at the chief and he winks, and then when the chief smiles, and then McMurphy goes and starts laughing and yelling and screaming and jumping around, hopping. I fooled you guys. And Nurse Ratched's pissed off. So that's the end of that sequence. But just two quick notes in reverse. One is when he walks in. Actually, if you do watch the film in real time, when the audience actually learns about that he's okay, it's when Nurse Ratched, right before he winks at the chief, she actually looks at him really like sarcastically and rubs her nose with her index finger. So clearly it's a visual sign that she knows, and we know then if you catch it, that he's okay, that he's messing with her or messing with them, So it's an hilarious and good little touch that Milos Forman puts in there, but most people don't realize it until they see the wink. So it's another reveal, of course. All these great reveals in this film. I'm going to rewind really quickly in my brain here and yours to the choreography of them sitting on the bench, and then I'm going to stop. So basically, when those three guys, Cheswick, McMurphy, and the chief, are sitting on the bench in this mental institution's hallway waiting to go in and have electro shock therapy, which we don't know that at that point. But the storyteller, Milos Forman or Ken Kesey, the screenwriter or writer, they have to decide on who goes first, or even why they're there. It could have just been Jack or Mac and the chief, or Mac and Cheswick or whatever. But of course, the reason three people are there is because, the big thing is you have to get McMurphy in there and get electroshock therapy, because it's a huge moment. But also you have to get this huge reveal, which is that the chief is fooling everybody, he can speak. So how do you do that? Well, you got to bring in Cheswick. You got to bring a third party so he can go first, leaving the chief and McMurphy alone. So McMurphy can find out that the chief is his ally, that he can talk. It's a huge moment. It's really well done with the choreography, again, with Cheswick screaming, going in there. So we're like, whoa, and then so important. And then just as important is who goes next. Of course it can't be the chief. The second person to go has to be McMurphy, because otherwise, we'd have to wait and say the chief would go in. It wouldn't be the same movie. McMurphy has to sit there for a while, then and there goes the chief. Now it's also out of efficiency, but it works so much better. So you introduce it with Cheswick going in there, and you follow it with McMurphy, and then you don't even see the chief getting his electroshock therapy, if they even gave it to him. So it's really great storytelling, efficient storytelling, but it creates tension. Again, it uses these ticking clocks and these amazing reveals. This whole sequence, again, it's like 12 minutes long max, but it's well worth watching, and definitely well worth watching the entire film. It's arguably my favorite film of all time, actually. I love this film. But check it out. I hope this makes sense. Again, this visual storytelling attempt I'm making in this podcast, I hope it painted the picture. If I didn't, let me know, Paul, or any of you out there, if I actually release it. But if it works, I'll keep doing it, 'cause I think it's kind of fun way to do it, and I can just babble and not have to worry about, if my hair looks good. Well, I'm joking. I don't really care. But the bottom line is, it's been a lot of fun, and see you next time.